Good Friday morning. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now. Step forward. We're following major news on the COVID front this morning, with Pfizer now asking the FDA for emergency use authorization for its vaccine in children ages 5 to 11. The latest timeline on when we could see a green light. Plus, the fight over masks in the classroom still raging months into the school year. We'll take you to one Tennessee county where a community remains divided. Done deal. Economic calamity avoided in the Senate overnight with a party line vote to raise the debt ceiling just days before the default deadline. But for how long will the U.S. be covered, and will the House go along? We'll bring you the latest from the Hill on this Friday morning. Also this morning, courtside, more than a dozen former NBA players charged with attempting to defraud the league's health care plan out of millions of dollars. How their scheme was uncovered and what the athletes are facing in a different kind of court. Plus, Crash Test, NASA's latest mission for planetary defense, pitting a lightning-fast spacecraft against what would be an Armageddon-bringing asteroid. So could this latest technique save Earth from a future disaster? There is something you didn't know you needed to worry about on this Friday morning.
That was not actual video.
Yeah.
I believe that was
some type of simulation.
A dramatization of some sort. So.
And I think the whole thing is very preventative. We're not that
right. We're good. We're safe.
There's not an asteroid on its way. So rest assured, we'll tell you a little bit more about that later. We begin this morning, though, with the effort to get more Americans vaccinated against COVID-19 as the number of deaths from the virus remains dangerously high.
President Biden is back at the White House this morning after traveling to Illinois yesterday, calling on private companies to mandate vaccines for employees. He said at first he didn't want to push mandates, but now they're proving effective in the workplace.
Look, I know the vaccination requirements are tough medicine. Unpopular with some, politics for others, but they're life-saving. They're game-changing for our country. We're in a position to leap forward in a way that we haven't for a long, long time economically. Businesses have more power than ever before to change the arc of this pandemic and save lives and protect and grow our economy. So as president, I'm going to continue to do everything I can to get us out of this pandemic.
The president's remarks come as parents anxiously wait to see when younger kids can get the vaccine. Regulators have agreed to tentatively meet on October 26th. That's when they discuss emergency use authorization of the Pfizer vaccine for kids between the ages of 5 and 11, which means it's possible it could be approved as early as Halloween. NBC News health and medical reporter Erica Edwards joins us now for more on this. So, Erica, let's start with the possibility of a COVID vaccine for kids as young as 5. How significant would that be in the fight against COVID? And do you see the FDA approving this quickly?
Hey, Joe, good morning. Well, it would be quite significant. It would be the first COVID-19 vaccine available for kids under age 12 in this country. Now, the FDA and CDC have generally worked pretty quickly to get shots in arms soon after their advisory committees have voted for them. But, you know, I've watched a lot of these meetings by now, and especially when it comes to children, there was a lot of debate. There was a lot of intense scrutiny of the data. Now, the other question is, will parents actually get their kids the shots? There was a survey released recently that found just about a third said they would get the shots for their kids right away. Another third were going to take sort of a wait and see approach. Meanwhile, Joe, there have been nearly 6 million children diagnosed with COVID-19 since the beginning of the pandemic.
So, Erica, we just heard from the president about vaccine mandates at businesses. A mandate went into effect today for at-home health care aides in New York. Employees are already bracing for possible staff shortages. Some of these workers might quit instead of getting vaccinated. How much would this affect care in New York? And I ask that because when a similar mandate went into effect for hospital workers in New York, the governor was prepared to call in the National Guard to fill in any gaps, but that maybe wouldn't necessarily work in this case, would it?
You're exactly right. Well, that's because home healthcare workers are highly specially trained. I mean, and quite frankly, patients want to stick with their aides who they feel comfortable with. That's because these workers tend to help patients with daily tasks, such as dressing and bathing. They are not easily substituted with National Guard members. Now, as you said, there is a potential shortage for these home healthcare workers in the state of New York who by today were required to get at least that first dose of a COVID-19 shot. I've seen estimates that only just about 70% of workers would qualify. Joe?
And Erica, let's look overseas. Finland has become the latest country to pause the use of the Moderna vaccine for younger males because of a rare cardiovascular side effect. Denmark and Sweden have also paused Moderna. How much of a concern is this? Any chance it could be paused at all in the U.S. as well?
Well, certainly a possibility. You remember that we paused the Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca clinical trials briefly. Meanwhile, federal health officials say that they are actively monitoring for these cases. Myocarditis, that's when the heart muscle becomes inflamed, and pericarditis, which is when the outer lining of the heart becomes inflamed. Mostly it's been reported among young males about a week or so after they received one of the mRNA vaccines, either Pfizer or Moderna. The reassuring news here is that most patients tend to recover quickly after treatment. They feel better pretty quickly, but still doctors say that, especially young men, after they get one of those vaccines, really do need to pay attention for symptoms. That includes shortness of breath, any sort of unusual chest pain, and like rapid fluttering of the heart. Joe?
All right, Erica Edwards, lots to cover this morning. Thanks so much.
Let's now bring in our friend, NBC News medical contributor, Dr. Natalie Azar for more. Dr. Azar, good morning. So what does Pfizer have to show to the FDA to get approved for the emergency use authorization? Tell us what they've been able to find out to make sure this is safe. And how would the approval change the way schools are functioning in the COVID era, given that this would still be emergency use? It's not that full authorization.
Right. So just, to get to the second part first, I don't think we're going to see a mandate until it's fully approved for schools. I just think that's just not going to happen. I don't think the country has quite an appetite for that. Right now, you may recall about a week and a half ago when Pfizer released its data, and they basically reported that the vaccination was safe, well tolerated, and effective in terms of its immunogenicity. That is, the vaccine was able to elicit an immune response that was comparable to that seen in adults. We already heard from them at that point that there wasn't enough data to actually give us an efficacy or effectiveness number because there weren't enough cases of COVID-19 in the two groups, the placebo and the vaccine group. And remember, Savannah, the trial, the approval is essentially being based on data from only around 2,000 kids. So I think this is important for people to keep in mind. Erica was just talking about the issue of myocarditis. That was not a side effect that was seen until millions of vaccines had been administered after approval or authorization when there's such a massive rollout. So I think the FDA has a really, really challenging task at hand. Remember, kids, although they do get sick, and I always want to stress that they are not completely benign, it's not a benign illness in them necessarily, the bar for safety has to be so much higher in this younger age group. And I think they're really going to be dissecting the data that they do have to make sure that when they do give the go-ahead, that the benefit clearly outweighs any potential risk.
The bar for safety has to be much higher. That's a really good point. Another question for you on Pfizer. Two new studies that are coming out of Qatar and Israel are showing that the efficacy of the Pfizer COVID vaccine drops just 2 months after getting the shot. But that doesn't mean it's all bad news. Protection against severe illness and hospitalization remained above 90%. Does this new data indicate new surges are possible in the U.S. if that efficacy drops and so many people got Pfizer? And could studies like these change the FDA's recommendation to have boosters potentially rolled out for all Americans instead of just that 65-plus group now?
So here is the problem, Savannah. When we get studies like this, and the Israel data was just numbers data. It was just antibodies waning. Qatar actually had real world data that showed that infection rates did increase a certain time period after you got your shot. This is what I want people to understand. Neutralizing antibodies, the stuff that we talk about, the stuff that people want measured, the numbers that we're following, those go down. They go down after every vaccination. I will point out that they are a little bit more durable with MMR for whatever reason, but the neutralizing antibody protects us only against infection, meaning that if you are exposed and you have a lot of neutralizing antibody, you're less likely to get infected. They don't necessarily protect against disease, and disease meaning that's landing you in the hospital. That is the thing that kills you. That your protection is coming from that other part of the immune system, T cells, B cells, all that stuff that we've talked about. But here's my point. I'm evolving a little bit on this in terms of boosters, because the concern is that, okay, so you have a mild infection. Is that such a big deal? Not to you personally, but maybe at a population level, it is. Number one, because you can infect people who can get very sick. And number two, every time the virus has the opportunity to spread, it has the opportunity to mutate. But again, I'm back to this thing. Are we really carpet bombing this virus? It's going to be here. And I think we just have to see where that steady state is, that we have just enough protection that we're not, feeding into variants, but we're not like over vaccinating for protection against the sniffles. Yeah. And I don't have the answer to that yet, but that's what I'm sort of like, waiting to figure out.
All right. We will be waiting to hear from you once you figure that out, because that is exactly why we have you here. Dr. Natalie Azar, thank you so much. Always great to see you. Happy Friday.
The battle over mask mandates inside classrooms is raging in Tennessee for proof look no further than the fight in Knox County, which just took another turn. A federal judge has ruled students will once again be required to wear masks indoors, reversing a policy made by the school board, which initially made masks optional. The decision has divided the community. The school district has more than 60,000 students. Some parents and students there are now saying enough is enough, while others are applauding the move. NBC News correspondent Cal Perry joins us now from Knoxville, Tennessee, with the latest. So, Cal, walk us through the latest policy stance on mask requirements there in Knox County Public Schools. Why did the federal judge intervene? What does it mean for students moving forward?
For students, as of right now, they're going to be required to wear those masks with no exemptions, except for two cases: if you're autistic or if you've had a tracheotomy. So very narrow, basically no exemptions. What happened here, and what a lot of parents feel betrayed about, parents on both sides, the school board initially said they would follow CDC recommendations for the school year and implement a mask guidance. They did that in the summer. Then in early fall, they reversed their own decision, saying they would not require any masks. A federal judge, as you said, overruled based on the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. 4 families sued, saying that their children were at a higher risk of getting sick because the coronavirus is so rampant, and the judge agreed with them. That is why there's this mask mandate in place. And as you have said, it has divided a community. You have small protests outside some schools in the county, and you have other parents, obviously, who are for the mandate. Those are very divisive issues at this time. Joe?
Yeah, and Cal, I know there have been impassioned school board meetings there. What are some of the arguments you're hearing from parents and students when it comes to the mask mandate there?
Yeah, so we went to a school board meeting on Wednesday. Over 60 people signed up to speak. It took 4 hours. I'm going to play you some sound from that. And then the third piece of sound that you'll hear is a parent who is for the mask mandate. So the first 2 pieces of sound are from that school board meeting. The third piece of sound from a mom who is for the mandate. Take a listen.
Friday will be my last day as a KCS student. You see, I believe that I have a right to a public education just as much as every other student in Knox County. But I do not see anyone standing up for me or these other students.
I actually quit my job in November because I was sick and tired of having to wear a mask and being told that I had to enforce masks on these children.
And I see family members, I see teachers, I see bus drivers, I see their family members that are passing away because it is exposed in school and passed through those people. And there's a trickle-down effect, and it's huge. And a piece of cloth is not something to argue over when you're talking about somebody's life and the effect that it can have on your family and your community.
Passions definitely inflamed. You heard there from a student who said that he could move, as well as a bus driver. To be clear, this is the minority. This is 59,000 students, so a very few minority, but as you said, inflamed passions to be sure.
I mean, Cal, let's look bigger picture. We know Tennessee Governor Bill Lee has tried to intervene on this issue of masks. He signed that executive order that says a school district that has a mask mandate, families can choose to opt out of it. That order has been blocked now in 3 different counties. Any reaction from him? What are his next steps?
So the state's attorney general says they are going to appeal it. You also have the plaintiffs that are trying to tweak basically the federal judge's motion and add some exemptions for children with disabilities. Again, I don't think anyone is really happy with the way this went. It is going to go up the courts, and we're seeing this around the country. We're seeing governors battle courts that are battling school boards, and you have confusion in the middle, and you unfortunately have a lot of students also caught in the middle, Joe.
All right, Cal Perry, thanks for your reporting. Appreciate it.
The debt ceiling crisis has been postponed. Last night, Senate Democrats convinced enough Republicans to avert economic catastrophe, but only until December. The Senate voted twice last night First, enough Republicans had to join Democrats on a procedural motion to break the filibuster. And then, in a second vote, only Democrats supported raising the debt ceiling. The vote now goes to the House before it heads to the president's desk. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitale joins us this morning. Ali, good morning. So Democrats were united in their votes last night, but Republicans were not. Tell us what happened. What did we miss overnight? What happened with this debt ceiling standoff?
Yeah, not surprising that Democrats stayed united on this. Chuck Schumer, was leader of the Democrats, had been saying consistently Democrats were fine to move forward on the debt ceiling by themselves if only Republicans would let them. That is ultimately what happened last night. 11 Republicans allowed Democrats to move on to the vote to actually raise the debt ceiling. You said it right. It was a procedural vote, a cloture vote that avoided the filibuster. That's why they needed 60 votes total. In the end, they got 61 because 11 Republicans chose to join with Democrats to move forward on this. Democrats then voted separately on their own to actually raise the debt ceiling by $480 billion. That gets us to around December 3rd, which means we're going to get another bite at this debt ceiling apple. It's also going to come along at the same time as government funding runs out. Also at the same time as Democrats are going to try to go through on that larger infrastructure agenda that they've been talking about over the last few weeks. So we've got a very busy pre-holiday season. But among Republicans, dissension in the ranks over how this played out. We know that Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell came to Democrats. He helped broker this deal. But this is how Ted Cruz says it played out. Listen.
Chuck Schumer won this game of chicken. As two trucks drove towards each other on a country road, one or the other was going to turn, or you were going to have a lot of dead chickens. I wish Republicans hadn't blinked. We shouldn't have done that.
And again, that's the Trump line on this. He's using words like folded when he describes what Senator Mitch McConnell did here by going forward and making a deal. There are other Republican senators who have also spoken critically of this move by Republican leadership. At the same time, though, this is where we are. And again, we're going to get to do this all again in a few weeks.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So you said around December 3rd, both of these crises have only been delayed. The government shutdown and the debt ceiling, they haven't been fixed. You've been so good about just breaking down what this really means. Essentially, the country's credit card bills. So if it was just pushed to December, what's going to happen then?
It's a great question. What Mitch McConnell says is that he allowed Democrats this extension of time because he wants them to do this process through reconciliation. That's the budget measure that they're also trying to use for the Build Back Better agenda, that larger multi-trillion-dollar social infrastructure package. They can do that separately. It's not the same reconciliation bill, but they're not going to do it in terms of the debt ceiling. McConnell is saying that that's how he wants it, but Democrats that I've spoken to, all of them nearly to a T, have said there is no way that we're doing this through reconciliation. Not just because it's a long and cumbersome process, although it is and it can be, but also because that's just not the way that they want to move forward on this. So again, we're going to see these same arguments start to play out in a few weeks. But for now, the U.S. line of credit remains solvent.
And Ali, before I let you go, I do want to ask about the January 6th investigation. The House Select Committee investigating the insurrection has issued more subpoenas. It comes at the same time 4 Trump associates were supposed to meet their subpoena deadline. Who else is being called to testify, and what's the latest here?
So 3 new subpoenas yesterday, Savannah. These were associated with the Stop the Steal rally that was supposed to be at the U.S. Capitol. They got the guys who were permitting for that event, as well as Stop the Steal LLC. This comes after we saw roughly 11 subpoenas issued to people who were involved with the rally over at the Ellipse, that initial rally where we saw people like former President Donald Trump, as well as others speak before that onslaught at the U.S. Capitol. What this does is it starts to paint a picture here of the way that the committee is starting to look at the specific day of January 6th. They're starting to get the organizers who were involved with these rallies, in addition to those 4 larger subpoenas, the names that your audience, I know everyone is very dialed in, but the names that your audience will really know, people like Mark Meadows, Steve Bannon, Dan Scavino, people who have been in the president's orbit for a long time. They missed their documents deadline yesterday. Their deposition deadlines come next week. They're probably going to miss those too, because we know that the former president is pressuring them not to comply. The committee has said that they can move forward with things like criminal complaint requests, trying to further enforce the subpoena requests. But this is going to end up in a legal battle.
All right, Ali Vitale, always with a lot to cover. Quite a busy week. Thank you so much for being up with us this morning.
This morning, new developments in that unfolding environmental disaster in Southern California. We're now getting our first look at a splintered underwater pipeline which caused that massive spill off the coast.
That's right, and now authorities warned the ripple effects from the spill could last months, even years. NBC News national correspondent Miguel Almaguer is in Huntington Beach, California with the latest.
The first images of the splintered pipeline, captured 80 feet underwater, reveal the more than foot-long gash where oil gushed into the Pacific. Authorities now say they're inspecting the 41-year-old pipe, which runs from this oil rig to shore, for signs of corrosion and pressure problems. But for now, many believe the pipe was likely hit by a 30-ton anchor like this one.
The fact that the pipeline appears to have been dragged leads me to conclude that it probably was caught on the ship's anchor.
Reviewing satellite imagery in the hours before and after the spill, the Coast Guard will likely be able to pinpoint which cargo ships were anchored in the area, a jammed shipping lane dotted with a maze of drilling platforms.
As long as you have shipping and offshore oil development operating in close proximity, this is the kind of accident and spill that you can expect to have happen.
With so much focus on the investigation, the true disaster is unfolding out here at sea. These booms can only hold back so much oil, which is quickly moving through this fragile ecosystem.
With more wildlife and pristine miles of beaches stained from this massive spill, the search for answers and the probe to hold someone responsible.
As the investigation progresses, the amount of crude that has spilled into the ocean has changed. Officials say at least 44,000 gallons have poured into the Pacific, but that number may also be as high as 144,000. Joe and Savannah, back to you guys.
All right, thanks, Miguel. And let's now get a check on your Morning News Now weather.
Bill Cairns joins us on this Friday morning. Bill, good morning.
How are ships able to anchor where there's pipes under the ground? I don't get it.
Yeah.
Doesn't make any sense. I know. Oh, well. So let's get into this. And our other story that we're going to develop over this upcoming weekend is the possibility of tropical development off the southeast coast. This will be not a huge tropical system, even if it becomes one, but it could become a tropical depression. So we are watching areas of heavy rain this morning. Yesterday, we had a horrific flooding in Alabama with the fatality of that child in the flash floods. Today, we've been seeing flash flooding in areas of southern portions of Georgia. Torrential rain with these thunderstorms has been moving, and it's all trying to slide towards Savannah this morning. So we'll have to watch out for any developing stories with that. You see that area of maroon down there near Eastman. That's already reported up to 6 to 8 inches of rain. So if there's flash flooding going on, that's where it's occurring. Atlanta was just dropped from your flash flood watch, so the heaviest rains will slowly be moving out. And as far as tropical development goes, a 30% chance. So earlier in the week, it was 10%. Now we're up to 30%. If this does develop, it'll be right off the coastline of South Carolina or North Carolina, especially over the Outer Banks area. And again, that would most likely be Saturday into Sunday. So if anyone has plans from Wilmington northwards through Cape Hatteras, even including the Norfolk area, Saturday looks pretty rough. It looks kind of windy. It looks rainy. And again, not going to be like a hurricane, but it will ruin your plans for your Saturday. And then Sunday, guys, all of that mess heads up towards New York City. So we'll talk more about the weekend forecast next hour.
All right.
That's always quite the tease. Thanks, Bill.
Coming up, high-level security talks between the U.S. and Mexico are slated for today.
Yeah, with the Secretaries of State and Homeland Security set to attend in Mexico City. We'll tell you what's on the table next.
Another humanitarian crisis is looming at the southern border.
Thousands of migrants are camped out just south of Texas in Mexico, where they not only face the threat of deportation and starvation, but also COVID. NBC News Now anchor Morgan Radford reports.
For Manuel and his young son, this is home. Fleeing from El Salvador, he's been here for more than 45 days. He's one of nearly 2,000 people living in this encampment in Reynosa, Mexico, hoping to get across the Texas border just steps away.
No estoy aquí porque yo quiero.
You're not here because you want to be here.
Sino porque fui amenazado por mi propia familia.
it's because you were threatened.
Manuel asked us not to use his full name or show his face for fear of violence from the cartels, which aid workers like Felicia Rangel-Sampanaro say have fought over this city for years as a trafficking route.
People are afraid to leave this encampment because they're afraid to get kidnapped.
Oh, they will get kidnapped. One person's worth between $2,000 and $6,000. So if you leave this encampment, yes, you will be kidnapped.
And when you say the different gangs are watching and monitoring this area,
yes.
I mean, are they watching now?
Yes.
There are nearly 2,000 people inside this encampment. You can see them lining up for basic necessities like food and water. But now they say the real threat is COVID.
Con tanta gente acá en este campamento, ¿tienes miedo del COVID? Do you have, with so many people here in this encampment, are you afraid of COVID?
Pues sí, sí se teme siempre, ¿verdad?
You're always afraid of it.
No podemos guardar distancia mucho.
You can't really maintain distance.
Pero sí vivimos con ese miedo siempre.
But you're always living with that fear.
A fear that many here say could soon get worse, since basic sanitation, like washing your hands or showering, is hard to come by.
Para poder bañarnos pagamos 10 pesos.
So to shower, you have to pay 10 pesos just to shower.
Estamos expuestos, todos estamos expuestos.
Aid workers like Felicia say they've seen a surge in COVID cases in recent weeks, with up to 150 people per day testing positive.
At one point, in each family, there was at least one person who had COVID. The kids had COVID. The moms had COVID. Pregnant women had COVID. Everyone had it.
It's a problem that traces back to a policy called Title 42, a section of U.S. health law first enforced by the Trump administration and still in place under President Biden. It essentially shuts down the Mexican border to many asylum seekers, leaving them to wait and face a shortage of COVID tests while they do.
What's the worst case scenario if you run out of COVID tests and simply cannot bring enough here?
The worst case scenario has already been happening. Ambulances have been called multiple times to this plaza because people can't breathe.
So to be clear, most of the people in this encampment do not have asylum or legal cases pending. Most are here just waiting for the border to open.
Yes, so this is hope you're looking at.
This is what hope looks like right now.
This is what hope looks like right now.
Hope to one day find a home better than this.
No tengo a dónde ir.
And you don't have any place to go. Así que realmente esta es la última chance. This is the last chance.
Sí.
Morgan Radford, NBC News, Reynosa, Mexico.
The Biden administration is aiming to improve ties with Mexico today, holding what's being called the first high-level security dialogue between the two countries. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is leading the American delegation in the talks in Mexico City. High on the agenda is the Merida Initiative, a security agreement between the two nations which could face a major overhaul.
We believe we are due for an updated look at our bilateral security cooperation, we need an approach that addresses the concerns and the priorities of both governments. And this will really be one of the core elements of the discussions.
NBC News Justice correspondent Julia Ainsley joins us now with more on this. So, Julia, tell us a little more about the Merida Initiative. What is it? How does it need to maybe change?
Well, it was started under the George W. Bush administration when immigration looked very different. And basically what it did is it pumped trillions of dollars into Mexico to try to get them to stop immigration before it came to the U.S. border. It was a very enforcement-heavy, money-heavy initiative. In other words, we're kind of paying Mexico to do our dirty work. That's what a lot of critics have said about this initiative. Now looking at the fact that there are a lot of asylum seekers coming through, and you can't take those images we just saw from Morgan out of this conversation. So many people trying to get to the United States are waiting in Mexico, and a lot of that is making crime worse in Mexico, and Mexico wants the United States to change its border policies, in part not to be sending asylum seekers and immigrants back into their country to be waiting in those overcrowded camps, and also to try to shut off some of what they think are the magnets, the reasons why people are trying to come to the United States, thinking they may have a chance to get it. So there's a lot that both sides want to gain from this. But at the heart of it, I do think that there's a real need or a real desire to change this initiative structure.
So, Julia, DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas is also attending the meetings. We know the ongoing border situation will likely play a big role in these talks. What can we expect on that front?
Yeah, that's right. So it's all tied in together. I think they'll be talking a lot about how they can address the root causes of immigration. That's been a big priority for this administration. We've seen it from the vice president. We've seen it from Secretary Mayorkas. And that really depends on how these conversations go between these officials at the Biden administration level and their counterparts in Mexico, how they can work together to try to keep immigrants safe and try to keep them from even making the journey through Mexico to the U.S. border, and how they can handle them when they get there. A big thing the Biden administration has been doing, and Morgan mentioned this, is Title 42. They haven't been able to implement that as widely as they'd like, which is to push more asylum seekers back into Mexico, because Mexico a lot of times refuses to take them. That's where we are now in terms of immigration relations between these two countries.
And Julia, quickly on this last point, is there a sense this could be an opportunity to reset relations with Mexico, which were somewhat volatile under the Trump administration?
Yeah, I think that's definitely the hope of this administration. We're going to see the Attorney General Merrick Garland there, as well as the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken. This will be a time where they really try to reset and try to really focus on this diplomacy first, root causes first. Let's build this again from the ground up solution. So we'll see what they come up with.
All right, Julia Ainsley, as always, thank you for your reporting.
Let's now take a look at what else is making news around the world this morning.
Matt Bodner joins us from Moscow. Matt, good morning.
Joe, Savannah, good morning. Happy Friday. Let's start things off today with the Nobel Peace Prize. The Nobel Committee this morning awarded the prize to Filipino journalist Maria Ressa and a Russian journalist as well, Dmitry Muratov, both of them being recognized for their, quote, efforts to safeguard freedom of expression. Now, both journalists have been very critical voices in their home countries, often at great personal risk, and just seeing some of the reaction this morning, the independent Russian journalism community is definitely very appreciative of this gesture. They've been under rather unprecedented pressure recently. Moving along, officials say that a United States Seawolf-class nuclear attack submarine, USS Connecticut, collided with an unidentified submerged object somewhere in the South China Sea. This incident took place a few days ago, and the Navy is being scant with the details. What we do know right now is that the Connecticut's nuclear power plant was undamaged, but there was some damage, and there were about a dozen sailors who received mild to moderate injuries as a result. But I'm definitely going to be keeping an eye on this story. And finally, some animal photography news. The Royal Society of Biology has announced winners of its annual photography competition. The winner this year goes to Vishwanath Birji, who took a shot in India of 2 ants eating honeydew excreted by a yellow aphid. The competition saw more than 1,600 entries this year. It's probably worth taking a look. Back to you guys.
Wow. I guess that's romantic on some level.
Incredible detail.
That's right.
That's all I have to say.
Can't stop looking. All right.
Thanks, Matt. All right, and coming up, more than a dozen former NBA players have been charged in an alleged multi-million-dollar health care scheme.
We'll tell you who's being accused, how they got caught, and how the league is responding. Next. Bobby Flay is reportedly putting his partnership with Food Network on the chopping block. Variety reports that the superstar chef is cutting ties with the Culinary Channel after a 27-year run, saying the two sides were unable to reach a deal on a new contract. Flay has been with Food Network since it first hit the airwaves all the way back in 1994. His current deal with the network runs until year's end. No word on whether the celebrity chef will jump to a new network in 2022, but I would guess yes.
Yeah.
He's kind of synonymous with that network.
Absolutely. He really is. But, you know, he'll land somewhere.
I think he'll be okay.
Yeah.
So
exactly. But we'll have to see. All right. Now to a pretty crazy one. The shocking arrest of 18 former NBA players. They're charged with attempting to defraud the NBA's health and welfare benefit plan out of nearly $4 million.
NBC News correspondent for investigations Tom Winter joins us now with more on this.
Yeah, Tom, hi. Good morning. Good to have you here on set with us. So one of these in this list is even one former NBA champion, Glenn Big Baby Davis. This is a pretty intensive scheme. Some of the details here are kind of wild. Tell us how they uncovered this. How is the scheme working?
Well, they didn't specifically say at the press conference yesterday how they came across it, but certainly I'm sure they got some help from the NBA's health and wellness program, just given the level of detail that's contained in this indictment. Essentially what you had here is a bunch of former players getting together and saying, look, we'll submit fake invoices for medical procedures that we never had and say that we paid for those out of pocket, so please reimburse us. The problem with that scheme is that you have to be a little bit creative. You can't use invoices without letterhead. You can't use invoices with poor spelling and grammar. And you probably should choose, when you submit those invoices to bill for medical procedures, that you actually were in the country, not playing basketball on the day that you said that you were getting a medical procedure done. That was some of the things that happened here. That's why this made this so easy for federal investigators to prosecute.
Now, investigators are saying the alleged scheme was sort of masterminded, orchestrated by former player Terrence Williams. He allegedly received kickbacks from this. I mean, how do they say this worked, and what's the NBA saying?
Right, so Williams was the one who set up a lot of these fake invoices and actually sent them to the players, and the players didn't change up any details. They just would send them in on their own. I mean, for instance, you had one particular a set of circumstances where allegedly a number of the players submitted for the same root canal on the same day for the same teeth. It'd be like the three of us all submitting, yeah, it's 7:40 Eastern time. We all had root canals on the same teeth. Like, I think NBC would kind of figure out that there was a problem here. So Terrence Williams, as you said in the indictment, actually says the word orchestrated this. And from 10 of the players, according to the allegations, he received kickbacks. So essentially he said, look, I'll give you these documents, but you got to kick back to me a little bit what you're getting from the NBA.
Some of these details are just something, Tom. Thank you. I love the root canal one. That's a good one. All right, now each player faces counts of conspiracy to commit healthcare and wire fraud. What kind of punishment comes with that?
Right. So just to take it back to Williams, he actually also has an aggravated identity theft charge. So he gets a mandatory of 2 years in prison minimum if he is convicted. For the others, they all face up to 20 years in prison for this. Now, I don't think they're going to get 20 years for it, but certainly jail time very much on the table.
Has the NBA said anything about this?
The NBA did release a statement that said, look, we look forward to cooperating with this, and they're on board with it as far as the investigation, and they're looking forward to working with the prosecutors, anything they can to make sure the investigation goes forward. It is an ongoing investigation.
All right. Interesting stuff. Wow.
We're all getting root canals today, 1 p.m.
Yeah.
I'll meet you there. Yeah.
What does this cost?
Right.
What's our kickback here? All right, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
Tom, thank you so much. Great to have you on set with us.
Good to be here. Coming up, relentless reporting on Mother Earth in the midst of a climate crisis.
It's the subject of tonight's Covering Climate Now Awards, focusing on excellence in environmental journalism from across the globe. We'll speak with one of those award-winning reporters next. Journalism focused on our changing climate is more important than ever. We've seen one extreme weather event after the other across the world. People are being displaced, becoming climate refugees as their home environments become uninhabitable. And it can also mean we are in a new pandemic era. That was the focus of a Rolling Stone piece by our next guest, exploring how our warming world expands the range of deadly diseases, meaning we could potentially see an explosion of these viruses from bats, mosquitoes, and ticks. Let's bring in the author of that piece, Jeff Goodell, contributing editor at Rolling Stone. Now, Jeff, good morning. So you're not only with us actually to discuss this piece, but also because we're both part of something pretty cool, the inaugural Covering Climate Now Journalism Awards. I had the pleasure of hosting them with Al Roker, and you are a winner. Congratulations. That piece that we just had up there won in the feature category. So let's dive in on this piece a little bit, and then we'll talk about the awards. One of the things that I think is so powerful is it lays out a real, tangible effect of climate change that could affect anyone and everyone. I know a lot of climate change effects right now might be something that people here in the U.S. don't see in their own front yard, but this would be different. Tell us a little bit about what you found here.
Well, I mean, one of the things that's, so interesting about this and that was compelling to me in writing this is understanding that as our world changes, as the temperatures change, as moisture changes, as, we all hear about heat waves and storms, but it's not just humans that are reacting to this. It's also animals who are migrating to new places, right? Looking for more temperate places to live. And some of those animals carry viruses that humans have not been exposed to before, or are carrying viruses that we have no defenses for. And that's a very kind of big deal. And when we think about what our future is going to look like in a warming world, mosquitoes and ticks and bats and many other creatures, they're doing the same thing that we're doing. Just as we are starting to move to new places, so are they. And we're bumping into each other. And the consequences of that bumping into each other could be, very profound.
Yeah, absolutely. I know one of the quotes in here that really got me was from one of your experts was, the fact is climate change is going to sicken and kill a lot of people. I think it's not exactly an aspect that we're talking about it that much. Also, Jeff, I think this is pretty major to have a whole award show dedicated to climate coverage. What do you think of the awards as a way to encourage more coverage, and how does it feel to be an inaugural winner?
Well, it feels great to be inaugural winner. Of course, I'm very flattered and honored by that. I think it's really significant, these awards, because I think that for too long, climate change has been seen as some kind of niche issue, some little environmental problem that deforestation or air pollution or something like that. And it certainly includes a lot of environmental problems, but it's much bigger than that. It's really about the story about the sort of changing of the operating system of the planet and what the implications of that are, both economically, politically, for public health, all kinds of different ways. And I think that these awards begins to recognize the scale of the story that we're trying to tell here.
And Jeff, what do you hope that people just watching the ceremony and seeing these winners highlighted get from watching it tonight?
Well, I think the diversity of the voices that you'll see in the show tonight, the journalists around the world who are looking at this from all different kinds of angles. Savannah, you did a great interview with Rahma Dia, an Egyptian journalist who won the award for emerging journalist. She's fantastic. I think it's really elevating a lot of voices that are not really heard in mainstream media enough.
Absolutely. Jeff, thank you for joining us this morning on this, and congratulations. I feel like, especially since it's the inaugural year, this is sort of like the Oscars of climate coverage, and you've got one. Maybe that should be our marketing campaign for next year. Thank you for joining us. Thanks for your time. Congrats again. And you can catch the Covering Climate Now Journalism Awards tonight right here on NBC News Now at 11 p.m. Eastern and 8 p.m. Pacific, hosted by myself and Al Roker.
New data from the Federal Reserve shows the average American's finances are actually doing okay during the economic recovery following the coronavirus pandemic, but it isn't the same across the board. Income inequality is still a big problem for minorities and those who are less educated. NBC News senior business reporter Ben Popkin is with us now to talk about this. So, Ben, first of all, explain where these numbers come from and what the biggest takeaway is from them. Were you surprised to see that people's finances, that at least for many people, didn't take more of a hit?
Well, the data comes from a survey of consumer finances, which is sponsored by the Federal Reserve, the Central Bank of America. They interview thousands of families about their finances and the demographic information. So if you're looking at these numbers and you're seeing people with college degrees are up $22.5 trillion in terms of household assets since the pandemic began, while those without college degrees are down $10 billion. White families, their households' total asset wealth is up $25 trillion, while blacks are only up $1.5 trillion, and Hispanics up $600 billion. You might be surprised that these numbers didn't take bigger hits, but have to remember that households tend to bring up these averages. Those households, a small number who own assets. The stock market was on a monster tear last year, despite the pandemic, and those are bringing up some of these numbers. But I think that the biggest takeaway is not the numbers themselves, but the difference between the levels. You can see that there's this lift off in the value for those households with college degrees and whites, while the others are flat. So the economy, even though in fits and starts, is rebounding. But what this shows is that minorities, those with less education, they're not going to participate in that recovery, and that's going to put them further behind as we go down the road.
I mean, yeah, Ben, these numbers remind us of the big structural inequalities in society. How did the pandemic exacerbate these?
Right. Well, I mean, taking a step back a minute, redlining, which was a practice decades ago of explicitly not lending to borrowers in minority concentrated neighborhoods, exclusion from investment, not being allowed to participate in the GI Bill. These are institutionalized practices that segregated wealth and opportunity in the country. It started decades ago, and they've had compounding impact on Black, Hispanic, disadvantaged groups for generations. The pandemic didn't change this. And because of those structural inequalities, those who were already ahead, folks with a house, equity, job, they were positioned to take even greater share of the gains as the economy has recovered. Just look at how stimulus spending was used. Those households that were doing well, they were able to use it for savings and investment, those stimulus payments. Those at the bottom level, they used it to pay for groceries and keep the lights on. Not a lot of time left for asset accumulation.
Ben, any sign that things may change and we can start to try and close this inequality gap?
Well, there's theory that public spending can help redress some of these harms in the private market. Upcoming infrastructure bill, trillions thrown for Biden's domestic policy agenda. That's looking to attack this from a lot of different angles. We're looking at free community college, more access to Medicare, and increased taxes on those who are at the top of the income ladder. That can help narrow some of these gaps.
Of course, Democrats still have to try and get that big plan through. All right, Ben, thanks so much. Appreciate your reporting.
Coming up, NASA's latest plan to defend against an Armageddon asteroid if Earth is ever threatened, of course.
Right, and they're testing the idea with another big bang of sorts. We'll explain next.
Now to more on a story we told you about yesterday, the incredible NASA plan to crash a small spacecraft into an asteroid intentionally in the name of science.
As NBC News correspondent Tom Costello explains, this is a first-of-a-kind experiment that's out of this world.
What is this thing?
It's an asteroid, sir.
It plays just like a scene out of a disaster movie. NASA's latest mission plans to send a small spacecraft on a collision course with an asteroid.
Asteroids have been hitting the Earth for billions of years. That's not new. What's exciting and new here is that we're actually taking the first steps to be able to prevent that potentially in the future. And that's where DART comes in.
NASA's Double Asteroid Redirection Test, or DART for short, is a first-of-its-kind test of planetary defense. The mission is scheduled to launch in November, putting the spacecraft on a collision course with an asteroid in September or October of next year.
It'll come speeding in 15,000 miles per hour in to hit this smaller asteroid.
This is just a test. The asteroid in question is not on a collision course with Earth, just close enough that when the spacecraft actually hits it, a small change in its orbit could actually be observed from Earth.
It really is just a small nudge. The key behind this is deflection, not disruption. We're absolutely not trying to disrupt this asteroid. We're just giving it a small nudge to change its future path.
A small nudge like this could be enough to redirect a similar-sized asteroid from a collision course with Earth. But this mission is really just a first step.
So DART is one part of NASA's larger planetary defense strategy. And it's not just all about deflecting asteroids. A really important part is finding all of the asteroids and tracking where they are.
Well, that is fascinating, and our thanks to Tom Costello for that report.
The Voto Latino Power Summit is an annual event that aims to embrace and educate the next generation of Latino voters. We recently caught up with Maria Teresa Kumar, the foundation's president and CEO, during this week's summit. She explains why this group of voters is crucial in future elections.
The Voto Latino Summit is an opportunity for us to talk to these rising leaders from around the country and teaching them the tools on how to run for office, how to be parts of campaigns. So this is an opportunity to come into community, to celebrate, to learn, and more importantly, recognizing that as long as we're present, we can continue changing that future. The Latino vote is going to continue to rise. By the next election, there'll be 12 million more young voters for presidential. 4 million of them are young Latino Americans. And a quarter of them reside in Texas. A large portion of them reside in Nevada, in Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania. It is no coincidence that when you are sitting at home, biting your nails, trying to figure out the results of election on election night, while these states are the ones that are the hotbed. There's a 250,000 more Latino youth that would be eligible to vote by next year. So instead of actually trying to engage and woo the voter and actually talk about policies that will excite these individuals and these young people, what they're trying to do on the Republican side, sadly, is stack the deck against them. And so one of the works that we're going to be talking about specifically here at the Power Summit is the importance of passing the Freedom to Vote Act. And this is something that we know resonates across party line, whether you're a Democrat, independent, or Republican. There is really hard to argue that our democracy thrives when everybody has fair and equal access to the voting booth. It is hard to talk about a strong democracy, little d democracy, if you have a party that is actively encouraging state legislators to pass voting restrictions. There are over 400 pieces of legislation and bills in state legislators right now that have been crafted since the start of January 1st, trying to prevent young people from voting, trying to curb access. And the beauty of the Freedom to Vote Act is that it standardizes federal elections so that every single state, regardless of the color of your skin, regardless of your zip code, everyone is playing by the same rules. And it modernizes our election system. It allows the one to register on the same day. It gives Election Day a federal holiday. That should be a big yes. There shouldn't be this idea that you're trying to juggle coming off a night shift, trying to take the kids to school, and then trying to find time in your life to vote. It should be as easy and accessible as possible.
In a historic first, more than half of eligible Latinos voted in the 2020 election. Voto Latino has registered more than 1 million new voters.
Wow. Quite a number.
It is. That does it for this hour.
Amazing to hear from her.
Yes, exactly. That does it for this hour Morning News Now.
But the news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.